Welcome to this progressive migration demo using Red Hat Service Interconnect. The use case that we're going to run through is to move an application progressively / slowly, at least risk, from OpenShift 3 to OpenShift 4. This process could be used for many other migration use cases as well. So our demo environment has a OpenShift 3 cluster running in AWS, and we have an OpenShift 4 cluster running in Intel in an on-premises data center. So I'm actually going to be migrating from the cloud to on-premises. So maybe I'm starting a new trend, who knows? So on OpenShift 3, we have an application called the Superheroes application, and it's running in a namespace called Superheroes. This application is made of sort of 4 distinct components. So one is the villain service down here with its database. Then we have the hero service with its database, the fight service with its database, which in turn calls the hero service and the villain service. And then on top, holding it all together, is the user interface. What we want to do is to migrate this whole application slowly from OpenShift 3 to OpenShift 4, running in the Heroes namespace in Intel Data Center. I've chosen to change the name purely to save my own sanity as we do this migration, so I don't get overly muddled up. Okay, so to start this process, we need to put a Service Interconnect router into the Superheroes namespace, and we need to put a Service Interconnect router into the Heroes namespace. So let's go ahead and do that. So before we get there though, let's just have a look at the application. So here we have that very application. And so we can go into Superheroes. Here we've got the fight service that's calling heroes and putting those on the left-hand side, and villains and putting those on the right-hand side. And then we can ask them to fight. And the winner's one with the highest number down here, basically. So if we select new ones, we can see them change and they can fight, and then one of them will win, and the result is recorded in the fight database, basically at the bottom here. That's the application. And as we saw, it's running currently in OpenShift 3. And so for those that haven't seen OpenShift 3 for a while, this will take you back. So let's go to the command line and start this work. So throughout this demo, we're going to be using 2 command line windows. The left one will always be OpenShift 3 running in AWS, and the right-hand side one will always be OpenShift 4 running in the Intel data center. So let's go ahead and install Service Interconnect into OpenShift 4, and we'll do that by running scupper init, create a site name of OCP4, and we're going to put the console into this cluster, into the OpenShift 4 cluster. On the right-hand side, we're going to install scupper into OpenShift 3, and the process is the same. This time we're not putting the console in though, but we'll call this site name OCP3. So if we just do scupper status here, we should see that there we go, it's installed successfully. And if we do scupper status here, we will see that it's installed successfully into OpenShift 3 as well. Okay, there we go. So scupper Service Interconnect is installed in namespace Superheroes with site name OCP3. Oh, it's still pending. It's not completely finished yet. Let's just make sure it has been successful. There we go. So it's now running. It is not connected to any other sites at this point in time. What we'll notice down here is that we've got a console. So we'll copy that console out, and we'll use that console here just to sort of start seeing what's going on. So if we go to the console, I'm just using its default login details, but you could configure this up to work with OpenShift OAuth and things like that, which will be much nicer in reality. So when you use the default, basically the password is held as secret. That secret is called console users. can copy the secret out. Log in, all being well, and we're in. Okay, so we're into the console. The console currently is showing very little because it's not actually linked to anything at all. So the next stage is to sort of look at how we link these up. So in Service Interconnect, we have this mantra of we connect the most private to the most public. So in other words, I have to open up the least amount of ports possible. Outbound ports are often less tricky to be able to have than inbound ones, especially in very secure networks. We can also have jump boxes in the middle. So if we wanted to go via sort of private subnets to public subnets to and so on, we can actually route through those multi-layers, but that's a topic of conversation for another day. So we're going to create that link, Intel most private to AWS most public, and that will create us a bi-directional link between these two sites. So let's go ahead and do that. So it's a two-step process that we go through. So on the OpenShift 3 side, we create a token that we can use to do the connection. So we do scupper create token create OCP3.yaml, and that will go and create the token for me. And then once that token has been created, there we go, you can see it's written, I can then do a scupper link create, giving it a name, OCP4 to OCP3, using that token that was created. So once that's done, we can now do scupper link status. We should be able to see whether we're connected. So it believes on the OpenShift 4 side that we're connected. Let's do a scupper status on the OpenShift 3 side. And sure enough, it also thinks it has a connection from the outside world. Let's just validate that through the console. So the console, I can't get the console up. There we go. Let's validate this through the console. So let's just do a refresh on there. We see 4, not 3. There we go. So we now have OpenShift 4 connected to OpenShift 3, and the arrow is giving you the direction of connection. But we can establish this connection and communicate in both directions. And through this demo, we will sort of prove that to you as we go. Okay, my terminal window seems to have got lost somewhere. Okay, so let's go into the demo again. We can see now we've got that connection established. That's all good. What we now want to do is put a connection basically back to the database as a sort of proxy service, and we do that using a command called scupper expose. So I want to expose this hero service on the OpenShift 3 cluster to the heroes namespace over here, creating a sort of proxy Kubernetes service along the way to do that. So having established this connection, it's a really easy thing to now go and do. So I can literally come into the OpenShift 3 side. We can do scupper expose deployment, heroes database. We're going to give an address of heroes DB, port 5432, which is where the application's expecting to talk to this database. So we do that. We can then do scupper service status. And what we should be able to see is that we now have a service called Heroes DB made available. And because this side has a target, it's responsible for making the call. So it is actually going to try and call the database for me. If I do scupper service status on this side, on the OpenShift 4 side, we should see that we have a Heroes DB, and this is where the scupper magic, Service Interconnect magic comes in, that provides the connection back over to the database for me running on that side. And let's just take a look at this in OpenShift itself. If we go to OpenShift 4, what we will see, if we look at networking, is that we will see a service for Heroes DB, and Heroes DB is pointing directly to the Service Internet scupper router. It's not actually talking to a physical application in that sense. So let's see if this can work, because in theory, if I've got a service, I should be able to talk to that service, and I should be able to talk back to the database. So you might have noticed that in the application project namespace, I do actually have a little Postgres database just so I can get access to the PL SQL command line. And let's see if we can do that. So we can go into Postgres database, into the terminal window. We can connect to the database. Let's just see. So we're connecting here to Superhero DB. If I can get the password correct. And it looks like we are connecting, which is very good. So let's just run a couple of queries against this data and see if it's really working. There we go. We're really connected to that database and it seems to be working a treat. I want to select just one hero, so I'm going to select Chewbacca just to make sure that's all good as well. And that's working lovely. Now, so we can sort of see what's going on, I'm just going to change this data as well. So let's go and update Chewbacca. Whoopsie. Let's update Chewbacca and commit that. And then just run the select again. So what we should see is now it says OCP3 in other name. And I'm doing this from the OpenShift 4 cluster. And I can sort of prove that I'm doing it from the OpenShift 4 cluster. Because if we look back at the console and we look at my processes, what we can start to see is we have a connection established between that Postgres container, that pod we were executing, and the database. And we can see that call is coming across the network. And we can actually drill in to here, and we can just give this a second, first time in, we can see it managing that connection and the data being transferred between them. And we can even go in further if we wanted to, and we can actually see the call from that container to the real database on the other side, and we can actually see connections that are established and details about those connections as well. So there's lots of things that we can see once you've got Scupper up and running, and there'll be other demos that cover that in sort of much more detail. So where are we now? So we have our database made available on this side. That all seems good. So the next stage is now to go and deploy the application onto the OpenShift 4 side and make that available as a sort of proxy hero service to the application on the OpenShift 3 side. So effectively, we're taking a chunk of the application out, moving it across, and then calling it remotely over Service Interconnect without change to any of the application as we make that move. So let's go and start that process. So if we come to OpenShift 4, what we want to do is to actually deploy the application now into OpenShift 4, so the REST hero and its database. So off we go. So that'll create the application for me. And then if we just come and just wait for that to happen. And what we should see is the application starting to come up. And there we go. So the Heroes application is now available for me. And I can just test that out on the command line here if I want to, if I'm still worried about whether that will work. I'm going to issue a curl command via the Scupper router. So basically I'm using the Knative, the Kubernetes service, not a OpenShift route to make the call. And we should be able to see that this is all working a treat. So that's nice. So let's just go JQ so it looks a bit nicer. And so we can see the service is all there, looking good and doing its job and talking back to that database on the other side, which again is interesting. So let's just look at that through the Scupper console. So if we go to the Scupper console, then in here, we can move these apart a bit more. We can actually see that the hero service, which is here, is also now talking to the Heroes database remotely. So that's cool. So all we need to do now is actually make this hero service available to the application. And that's done simply by exposing the service again on this side. So very similar to what we did with the database. So before we do it though, let's just go back to the console and go to the OpenShift 3 console and look at the hero service. So you can sort of see what's actually going on. So if we look at the service here now, we can see that that service, hero service, wherever you are, here it is actually talking to the real application, the real application that's doing the work for us on OpenShift 3. So now we're going to do the expose. So we're going to do a scupper expose, the deployment config REST heroes at the address REST heroes port 8083 on this side. Okay, so that's exposed that. So we can now do scupper service status, just as we were doing earlier. And what we should see is that we now have a REST heroes with its target on this side. If we do scupper service status on the OpenShift 3 side, we should now see that we've got REST heroes that has no target. So it's going to resolve to OpenShift 4. Now, just to prove that point, if we come back to the OpenShift 3 cluster, we can now actually see that we're routing to the scupper router. We're not routing to the real endpoint here at this point. So let's just make sure this works. Okay, and that looks like it's all good to me. So that should now be talking through to the OpenShift 4 side, and we'll check that out in just a second. But the other thing that I just wanted to point that if things have gone wrong at this point and we needed to roll back, it's pretty easy for me to come back down here and do a, let's just clear this window so we see what's going on. We can do a scupper unexpose deployment config REST heroes. And having done that, just quickly look on this side here, service status. What we should see that REST heroes has now disappeared from the list. So it's now gone from that list. If we come back to the service is now going back to REST heroes locally. So if we were to run the app again, the app is now talking locally rather than going to the OpenShift 4 cluster. So there are opportunities through this migration as well to roll back if things go wrong. But we know this isn't going to work, so let's carry on. So we'll re-expose it. Let's clear these windows so we can sort of see what's going on. Okay, that's exposed. Let's go back and make sure the application is still working. And it is, seems to be working nice. And let's just go back to the Service Interconnect console and see what's actually going on here as well. So we should start seeing that the fight service, might be a bit quick for it here. The fight service, let's just try refresh. There we go. Pull the fight service out here. So the fight service is now talking to the hero service, which is now talking back to the heroes database. So we've moved the service across, but at this point, we've left the database still in OpenShift 3. So we're moving at snail's pace just to make sure nothing goes wrong. So the sort of final stage is to sort of bite the bullet and say, well, let's migrate to the whole thing. So when we migrate the whole thing, we now want to point it to the local heroes database on OpenShift 4. We want to then remove the connections through Service Interconnect and also delete the application completely from the right-hand side as well, so from OpenShift 3. So let's go and do that. So first off, though, I'm a little bit nervous about doing these things, so I'm just going to give it one final test by scaling down REST heroes on this side. So if we scale REST heroes down to 0, we know it can't run now. It's not physically running, so it can't be doing anything because it's not there, or it won't be in a second once it just disappears. There we go, so it's gone. So this application can only be working by talking remotely to the other service on the other side. So we know that this is absolutely working now. So I'm feeling pretty cool about this. So we need to go and move its database across. So what we're going to do is we're going to unexpose the database from Service Interconnect. We don't need that anymore for this database. So that will remove it. But because Service Interconnect created the REST Hero service on OpenShift 4 automatically for me, what it means is it's actually deleted that service at this point because it wasn't a service created by my application in the first instance. So what I need to do is just make sure I put that back so things will continue to work. So we're going to expose the database on this side. And what that should mean is that we're now talking remotely to the database. Now let's just give that a go. So if we do we can do a REST heroes query on this side. Let's just try it. Oh, it's on the wrong port, sorry. Port 8083 we exposed it on. All right, and let's just go JQ. Okay, so we can see it's moved, but my application's clever, and it only ever does this when I do a recording or show it to a customer directly. It's cached the data. So if I just go OC get pods, what I can do is just absolutely make sure this is all working by just killing the pod. So OpenShift will restart it for me. So if we just do OC delete pod. Okay, we'll get pods again. We should see that starting back up. So here we are, it's creating the container. Creating the container. Oh, running. There we go, running. So let's give that a go. There we go. So no OCP3 appearing in there anymore. So we know now, without shadow of a doubt, we're talking to the OpenShift for everything from this side. So let's just make sure it is all still working. Beautiful, working nice. So the final step then is to say, well, okay, let's actually get rid of OpenShift, the hero service completely from OpenShift 3. So to do that, we will simply do a delete all with an application equals hero service, and that labels on all of the components and make that service up, and it will go and delete it. So we can now just come back to the console, and if we go back to the console, oops, I beg your pardon, we should be able to see that REST Heroes has completely gone from this side now and is only on the OpenShift 4 side. So done that very slowly, but very purposefully, and we've migrated one service across, and we've not changed anything of the application on either side. It's exactly the same application that I deployed on OpenShift 3 and OpenShift 4. So we'll start speeding this up a little bit now. So we're going to do the same thing with villains, but this time I'm scripting it largely. So we want to take the villain service and its database, move it across, and expose that as a sort of proxy service on this side as well. So let's go ahead and do that. So we've got the script to do it. We can just run that script over here. And so this will actually go and deploy the villain service for me onto OpenShift 4. Okay, and let's just make sure that that's coming up okay. So let's get rid of that window. There we come. We can start to see that appearing. So this is firing up. So database is up, the service is up, and in the script I do the expose for us as well, so we don't have to do it manually. So if we now do scupper service status and scupper service status, what we should see is on the left-hand side here that we're building up a list of proxy services effectively. So we've now got hero service and we've got villain service that are proxy service to the target service running on OpenShift 4. So the migration looks like, to me at least, it's going pretty well. So let's just test it out. So if we come to the Superheroes app now, that should be talking through to both the heroes and the villain service running on the OpenShift 4 side. And just like before, we can go back to our console and check that out. And sure enough, we can see that let's move them up here so they're nice and clear. We have the villains. Let's come here. We've got villains, beg your pardon, REST fights talking to both the villain service and also the the hero service remotely, and still no change to the application. we've not actually touched the UI or the fight application at all. They just think they're talking to a local application still. And that's a really important thing to understand in what we're actually doing here. It's hands off in terms of changing applications and things like that, not needed. All right, so that's all nice and good. And let's just give it one more test. Happy days, that's all working. So let's now just do belt and braces. Let's scale down the application on OpenShift 3. So we'll scale down both the villains REST service and we'll scale down its database as well, just to be absolutely sure. And so if we now look at the villain service, it's scaled down to 0. Database is just 0 now. And let's just make sure the application is still working. That's looking pretty good to me. So villain service is gone. So let's actually remove the villain service then from OpenShift 3. Not required anymore. So that's the service gone, and that's the database gone, and the root gone. So if we come back here, the villains DB will hopefully disappear in a moment. There it goes. And the villain service is gone. So we're getting less and less application on this side. One more test just to make absolutely sure this is working. So new fight, yeah, application still working a treat. So we're moving on at a pace now. So let's go and do the same thing with the fight service. So the fight service is an interesting one because it too has a database, but it also has dependencies on the other services that were there. So far it's been talking to those services remotely, unaware, via Service Interconnect. But now we're going to bring the little thing back together, or slowly bring it back together. It's still going to talk through Service Interconnect for now, logically, but we'll take that out as well at the end, and so it will all be directly communicating just like it was on OpenShift 3. So everything should be there. We're getting a little bit more gung-ho about this now, so we can speed things up even more. So let's move the fight service. So the fight service is quite a complex one. So it's got Kafka and various other things that are part of this service. So all of it's going in one go. Of course, I could migrate this slower, piece by piece as well, but I'd have you here all night, which would be no use to anybody. So let's just wait for that to completely finish up. And we're getting so confident now that I'm not even going to test. I'm literally just going to go and remove the fight service from this side. Look at that confidence. So let's see if it's still working though. We'll just need to wait for this to finish whilst it sorts out its roots. All right, so that's that completely undeployed. So if we go back, are we still able to fight? So now the fight service is only on OpenShift 4, and it all looks to be working absolutely fine. If we look at the actual Service Interconnect console now, it's really getting a bit lightweight on the OpenShift 3 side. Everything apart from the user interface, which we don't really know much about the call chain here because we've not exposed anything. Everything else is sort of running now over on the OpenShift 4 side of the house, which is all pretty cool. So if we now look at the OpenShift 3 cluster, we can see we're getting pretty lightweight. Most of this application has gone. So let's carry on. So the sort of final application stage is to move the user interface across and hook that up to the fight service here and remove it from the superheroes that side. I might do this just a bit slower just to make sure everything works, because this is like our final no going back type of move really. So let's just clear these down so we can see what's going on both sides. And let's actually deploy the user interface onto OpenShift 4. All right, so it's creating the service, deploying the application. Let's go and take a look at what's going on. So let's wait for that to sort itself out. There we go. So we see the application just coming up here. There we go. So the application is now up and running. So if we click on there, let's see if it works. So this should be the whole application now running on OpenShift 4. So we've pretty much finished this migration, doing it in a very progressive style. And sure enough, everything is working. But of course, we left it just here as well, the belt and braces, just to make sure. So we've still got it running from the user interface point of view on OpenShift 3. So our final step really to migrate the application is to just go and remove the user interface from OpenShift 3. So let's get that going. And so what we will see is in a few moments that the application has become unavailable. It's not there anymore. So we can delete that. If we come back to superheroes here, let's just make absolutely sure we haven't broken anything and we're still working. And sure enough, the application is working a treat. Now, if we look at the OpenShift console for OpenShift 3 again, we can see that the application is gone. The only thing left now is to clean up, is to get rid of the router. So when we come back to the diagram, what we want to do is to remove the leftovers from this cluster. And we can do that just by deleting Service Interconnect. So if we come onto here, scupper delete. There we go. That's that removed. And there we go. Nothing more satisfying than a completely migrated application. Nothing is left on OpenShift 3 whatsoever. So let's just make sure the app is still working. Of course it is. Oh, nice. Look in the console. What we will see, it might takes it a couple of minutes sometimes for it to disappear. But OpenShift 3 will disappear off that list because it's not linked anymore. It's not there anymore. Everything's gone. It's still there, but it will disappear shortly. And so the final thing to do is really up to, there we go, there it's gone. The final thing to do is to say, well, do we really need Service Interconnect here anymore? There could be a possibility that we chose to migrate the services to different clusters, for example, and therefore Service Interconnect would still be a great way of linking those things together. But if we are literally just saying, right, we're moving it, we're not changing, nobody else is consuming, we don't need to expose it beyond firewalls, then we may choose to actually get rid of Service Interconnect completely here as well. So what we want to do is basically to unexpose everything. So if we look at the moment, oh, we didn't see it, we would have seen a whole list on the left-hand side, but of course we've deleted the cluster. If we look here at the moment, scupper service status, we can still see that the services are exposed and are being indeed pulled through Service Interconnect. So what we would need to do is to unexpose them all. So we'd do unexpose the heroes, we would do unexpose villains, we would do unexpose the fights, and now we've removed scupper basically from everything. Let's just check. So no service is defined anymore. Let's make sure the application still works. So here we are, still working. And then the final step, if we choose to, is to say, well, actually, we don't need scupper here anymore either. So we can do scupper delete, which removes the router from the right-hand side. And effectively, we only have the application as it was, but now on OpenShift 3, having migrated it step by step. No Service Interconnect here anymore. That's gone. And we just have our pure standalone application progressively migrated over to the Intel data center. Thanks very much for listening.